In 1881, a single photograph captured a secret so dangerous it could destroy a king. A young actor sits confidently while Bavaria's king stands beside him, breaking every rule of royal protocol. What seems like a simple image hides forbidden love, shadowed conspiracies, and secrets powerful men would kill to protect. This photograph wasn't just evidence, it was a death sentence. Within years, the king who built fairy tale castles, reversed his life into darkness, and defied society's rules, would be found dead under mysterious circumstances. The question remains, what truth could one image reveal that was worth a king's life? When the photograph reached the inner circle of ministers and court officials, there was no debate about what it meant. These were men trained to read power, hierarchy, and symbolism. They understood royal protocol the way soldiers understand rank, and this image broke every rule. The danger was not public embarrassment. Kings had survived affairs, rumours, and scandals before. What terrified them was that this photograph confirmed something that had only existed as whispers. It turned suspicion into certainty. It proved that the king lived a double life, one that could never be reconciled with the throne. In that moment, the issue stopped being moral and became political. A king exposed in this way was not just vulnerable, he was uncontrollable. And uncontrollable power is the one thing governments cannot tolerate. Quiet meetings followed. Voices were lowered. Decisions were framed as concern, responsibility, and duty to the state. But underneath the polite language were only two real options. The first was to erase the photograph completely. Every copy destroyed, every witness silenced, every trace buried. But photographs have a habit of surviving, and secrets like this rarely stay contained. The second option was far simpler, far more permanent. Remove the man the photograph exposed. Once that idea took root, everything else became easier. Evidence could be gathered, testimonies could be shaped, doctors could be persuaded, files could be sealed. A narrative could be written in advance. What mattered most was speed and control. Because if the truth reached the public, it would not just damage the king, it would damage the entire system that had protected him for so long. And so, long before anyone spoke of illness or madness, the king's fate was quietly decided. Not in anger, not in panic, but with calm, deliberate efficiency. To the outside world, the king was already a legend. History remembered him as a dreamer, an eccentric ruler lost in fantasy. Travel books spoke of fairy tale castles, romantic towers rising above forests, and a lonely monarch obsessed with beauty and art. School lessons reduced him to a curiosity, a strange but harmless figure who wasted money on impossible dreams. Even today, millions of tourists walk through his palaces, believing they understand him. They are told he was mad, or too sensitive for power, or simply unfit to rule. It is an easy story, a comfortable one, because it avoids a far more dangerous truth. Behind the polished myth was a private life that could never be shown in daylight. A life built on secrecy, fear, and constant self-control. The king did not fail the throne because he lacked discipline or intelligence. He failed because the throne had no place for who he truly was. The identity he was forced to hide was not a weakness, but it was incompatible with monarchy. And when society cannot accept difference, it reaches for diagnosis. That is where madness enters the story. Madness is useful. Madness does not need proof. Madness silences sympathy and ends debate. Once a man is labelled insane, his words lose value, his memories become unreliable, and his suffering is dismissed as delusion. This label allowed the state to erase complexity and replace it with a single explanation. Not secrecy, not repression, not cruelty from others, but illness. And so the public myth was carefully shaped. The castles became symbols of foolish excess, not shelters of survival. His solitude became proof of instability, not isolation. The world was taught to see a broken king, never a trapped one. And as long as people believed that story, no one would ask the question that truly mattered. What if he wasn't mad at all? Long before the castles, long before the photograph, The king first encountered the truth about himself as a young man. He was still a prince then, surrounded by ceremony, tradition, and expectation. It happened quietly, the way the most dangerous realizations always do. Another man entered his life, someone close enough to be trusted, admired, and slowly loved. At first, the feeling was confusing, almost frightening. There were no words for it that did not carry risk. In that world, such feelings were not discussed, not acknowledged, and certainly not forgiven. Yet the connection was undeniable. A look held too long, a presence that felt necessary, an ache that grew stronger in silence. For the first time, the prince understood something about himself that could never be undone. And with that understanding came fear. Every hallway had eyes, every servant had ears. Privacy was an illusion. Love letters had to be hidden, meetings had to be stolen. Even then, rumours spread. They always do. Court officials noticed the closeness. Whispers travelled faster than footsteps. Soon, intervention followed, swift and merciless. The man was removed from the prince's life without warning, reassigned, erased, sent away as if he had never existed. No explanation was offered, no goodbye was allowed. The lesson was brutal and unforgettable. Love, when it crossed invisible boundaries, would be punished without mercy. The prince was expected to move on, to forget, to reshape himself into something acceptable. Outwardly, he obeyed. Inwardly, something broke and hardened at the same time. From that moment forward, he understood that truth would always cost him everything, and if he wished to survive, the part of himself that loved freely would have to live in hiding. After that first loss, the change in the king did not come suddenly. It unfolded slowly, almost gently, as if even his own mind was afraid of the truth. At first, he stayed awake a little later than usual. Morning meetings were missed and excused as fatigue. Then afternoons grew quiet. By the time others were ending their day, his was only beginning. Courtiers whispered that he was becoming strange, detached, disinterested in rule. What they did not understand was that he was learning how to survive. Daylight demanded performance. It demanded marriage, heirs, and obedience to roles he could never fulfill. Night asked for nothing. In darkness, expectations slept. In darkness, judgment softened. The king discovered that when the world closed its eyes, he could finally open his own. This was not madness, it was control. By shifting his life into the night, he created a narrow space where he could exist without constant fear. Gradually, his schedule reversed entirely. He rose at dusk, ate at midnight, worked while others dreamed, and retreated only as the sun returned. To ministers, this appeared irrational, even alarming. To the king, it was freedom measured in hours. The night became a shield, a private territory beyond the reach of tradition and surveillance. Within it, he could choose who entered his world and who remained outside. Over time, this pattern hardened into a system. Darkness was no longer a preference, it was a boundary. And within that boundary, the king was no longer performing a role. He was becoming something else entirely. Not a ruler in the traditional sense, but the quiet architect of a hidden life, one built carefully in shadow, where truth could breathe without consequence. Even as the king withdrew deeper into his nocturnal world, Ludwig's imagination and obsession with privacy found their ultimate expression in the castles he commissioned. Nushwanstein, Linderhof, and Herrenchiemsee were not built to host courts, negotiate treaties, or flaunt power. They were designed as private sanctuaries, labyrinths where only he could walk freely without pretense. Every corridor, staircase, and passage had a purpose far beyond aesthetics. Some corridors were intentionally convoluted, forcing visitors or servants to take winding paths where they could never see the king unless he allowed it. Hidden doors, almost invisible in the intricate wood panelling, allowed servants to come and go without being noticed. Even the grand throne rooms, often the heart of power in any castle, were stripped of their expected function. At Nushwanstein, the throne was never installed, a deliberate absence signalling that the king had no intention of performing public duties there. The rooms were vast, yet intimate, with niches and balconies that allowed Ludwig to observe without being observed. The architecture itself became a tool of secrecy. He could retreat instantly into hidden chambers, appear suddenly in unexpected places, or vanish entirely if the wrong people arrived. Courtiers might admire the dazzling mosaics, the gilded ornaments, or the Byzantine-style ceilings, but they would never know that these were not mere displays of grandeur. They were carefully constructed shields. Ludwig's castles were monuments of isolation and protection, statements that the outside world would not penetrate his private life. In these stones, timber and glass, he created a kingdom that existed parallel to the daylight reality of Bavaria, a shadow world where he could live truthfully, even if the world above could not understand or tolerate it. Every element, every design choice, whispered the king's need for privacy, secrecy, and unbridled freedom. Within the walls of his hidden castles, Ludwig assembled a carefully curated circle of companions who would inhabit his shadow kingdom. These were not mere courtiers, nor random servants. They were young men chosen for their beauty, their talent, and their discretion. Some were actors, freshly departed from Munich's theatres, carrying the confidence of performance yet vulnerable to the king's magnetic presence. Others were stable boys and grooms, humble in origin but elevated quickly, gaining access to private chambers, titles, and fortunes beyond their imagining. Each was selected for loyalty, but also for the emotional intensity they could bring to Ludwig's secret world. Within these walls, passion and guilt coexisted, creating a delicate balance between desire and self-restraint. Diaries and letters from the king reveal the psychological war he waged inside himself. On one page, Ludwig exalts the beauty and devotion of his companions. On the next, he confesses a tormenting sense of sin, fear of divine punishment, and a desperate longing for secrecy. He lavished gifts, gave property, and created roles that elevated these men to near equal status within his private realm, yet he never allowed them to overstep the boundaries of the shadow court. Love and obsession intertwined with fear and self-punishment, forming a network of human bonds as intricate as the hidden passages of his castles. This inner circle became the lifeblood of the night world, the only community where Ludwig could live authentically, where his desires were met with understanding, and where the outside world could not intrude. Every smile, every glance, every carefully orchestrated interaction became part of a performance whose audience was both present and absent, the king and the unseen eyes of history. In the midst of this carefully constructed world, Ludwig created a space that was more than a castle or a chamber. It was a controlled fantasy, a private paradise where every detail could be orchestrated. The Venus Grotto at Linderhof became the crown jewel of this shadow kingdom, an artificial cave with a heated lake, designed for comfort, beauty, and secrecy. Mechanical wave machines simulated gentle ripples across the water, while hidden musicians played soft, haunting music from behind faux rocks, their instruments echoing off the walls. But it was the lighting that transformed the grotto into something extraordinary. Electric lights, revolutionary for their time, capable of changing colour at the king's whim. Red light brought the cave to life as a symbol of passion, blue light evoked the melancholy of a hidden world, and green reflected envy or jealousy. Total environmental control meant that every visit could be curated precisely, every mood manipulated, every interaction framed to suit the king's desires. Within this space, Ludwig could orchestrate scenes of beauty and intimacy without fear of intrusion. Silence was enforced through gold and discretion. Servants were paid handsomely to forget what they saw, and memory itself became a commodity, carefully managed. Guests understood that this was a place where ordinary rules did not apply, where appearances could be deceiving, and where the king ruled not just with authority, but with imagination and the careful manipulation of space and perception. In this artificial paradise, the line between fantasy and reality blurred, and Ludwig could live fully, unapologetically, away from the judgmental eyes of society. It was a kingdom where he could love, laugh, and exist as himself, a hidden world that could vanish instantly if anyone dared cross its thresholds. Everything in Ludwig's shadow kingdom had remained secret, carefully curated and controlled, until the wrong man arrived. Yusuf Kent, a young actor, entered this world not as an entertainer, but as someone entirely different. confident, curious, and unafraid of the king's unusual demands. Unlike the other companions, he did not approach Ludwig with reverence or caution. He met the king as an equal in spirit, recognizing the loneliness behind the gilded walls. There was an immediate spark, something electric that neither could deny. Kindt's ambition and intelligence drew Ludwig in, but it was his fearlessness, the refusal to be intimidated by the king's status or peculiarities, that made him irresistible. Within days, the bond between them intensified. Private conversations that lasted until dawn, shared laughter, and stolen confidences created a closeness that no walls, no hidden corridors could contain. Kindt was different because he questioned, he observed, and he existed without pretense. Ludwig, who had long hidden in darkness to be free, suddenly found himself vulnerable, captivated by someone who might see too much. The king's obsession with Kindt grew rapidly, his caution giving way to infatuation. In his desire to be near Kindt, Ludwig allowed a single fatal misstep, a lapse in the meticulous secrecy that had protected him for decades. The presence of this confident, curious young man destabilized the careful order of the Shadow Kingdom, setting the stage for exposure. Kindt's arrival did not just ignite passion, it introduced risk, vulnerability, and a chain of events that would ultimately unravel the carefully hidden life of the king. For the first time in years, Ludwig's private kingdom faced a force it could not fully control, a reminder that even in darkness, secrets have a way of reaching the light. The moment that would forever change the king's life arrived quietly, but with explosive consequence. The forbidden photograph. In Lucerne, a photographer captured a single image that broke centuries of royal protocol and exposed a secret no one was meant to see. In the photograph, Isef Kindt sits casually in an ornate chair, relaxed and self-assured, while Ludwig stands beside him, the King of Bavaria, subservient in posture, his gaze fixed entirely on the young actor. To anyone familiar with European court customs, the image was visually shocking. A monarch should never stand while a commoner sits. Yet beyond protocol, the photograph told a story of desire, obsession, and vulnerability. Every detail screams intimacy. Kindt's slight smile, confident and knowing, contrasts sharply with Ludwig's longing, helpless expression. It was not a moment of authority captured. It was a moment of surrender, of truth exposed in black and white. When copies reached Munich, ministers and courtiers recognized immediately what it meant. This was evidence, not memory. It confirmed the king's hidden life, his forbidden loves, and his rebellion against the rigid expectations of monarchy. The image was incendiary, a spark in a powder keg of ambition, jealousy, and fear. Within hours, powerful men understood the stakes. Protect the secret at all costs, or eliminate the man who threatened the social order with his mere existence. No amount of money, threat, or persuasion could erase the truth captured in silver halide. Within 5 years of this photograph surfacing, the king would be dead, and countless lives intertwined in his shadow kingdom would be changed forever. The photograph, silent and still, became the instrument of fate, a tangible proof of what decades of secrecy had failed to hide. It was the beginning of the end. Once the photograph circulated in Munich, Ludwig's enemies moved quickly, turning private affection into political ammunition. Count Maximilian von Holstein, a former friend turned rival, saw an opportunity to seize power and dismantle the king's carefully constructed world. He began collecting evidence relentlessly, not just the photograph, but testimonies from dismissed servants, receipts for lavish gifts to young companions, and even stolen excerpts from Ludwig's diaries. Every intimate detail became a weapon, a piece in a puzzle designed to portray the king as unstable and unfit to rule. But political ambition alone was not enough. Holstein understood that in Bavaria, discreet same-sex relationships might be tolerated if hidden, but public knowledge could justify action. To solidify the claim, he enlisted the most respected authority of the day, Dr. Bernhard von Guden, a psychiatrist with influence and ambition. Remarkably, Guden had never met Ludwig, yet he produced a detailed medical report declaring the king insane. Every eccentricity was reframed as pathology: the reversed sleep schedule, the nocturnal gatherings, the lavish performances, and the relationships with men. Holstein and Gudin weaponized intimacy, turning the king's passion into evidence of moral corruption and mental instability. What had been a secret world of beauty, loyalty, and love was transformed into a narrative of madness and danger. Letters, diaries, and photograph, all proof of devotion, were twisted into evidence of depravity and disorder. The machinery of power moved swiftly, its gears grinding with precision. The conspirators didn't simply want to depose a king, they needed to destroy him morally, politically, and publicly. They created a narrative in which truth and fabrication were indistinguishable, where the king's private life became justification for control. The photograph had not just revealed a secret, it had set in motion a calculated campaign to end a life that dared exist outside the limits of power. The coup against Ludwig II was swift and ruthless, executed with the cold efficiency of men who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. On June 10, 1886, he was declared unfit to rule, stripped of authority, and replaced by his uncle, Prince Luitpold, as regent. The announcement itself was formal, clinical, and devoid of any acknowledgement of the king's humanity. Within hours, orders were sent to Nushwanstein and Linderhof. Ludwig was to be arrested quietly and taken to Berg Castle on Lake Starnberg. The king, always observant and cautious, learned of the approaching commission mere hours before their arrival. Loyal servants, aware of the coming disaster, offered him a choice: flee across the border into the safety arranged by Empress Elizabeth of Austria, or remain and face the inevitability of the commission. For a man who had spent decades hiding, creating an elaborate world of freedom and secrecy, the options were stark yet hollow. Escape meant abandoning everything he loved, leaving behind his castles, his companions, and his shadow kingdom. Resistance risked open confrontation with men prepared to seize him by force. Ludwig, exhausted and resigned, chose neither rebellion nor flight. When the commission arrived at his private chambers in the early hours of June 12th, they found him fully dressed, waiting as if to meet destiny on his own terms. Calm, composed, and eerily dignified, he submitted without a word of protest. In that moment, the man who had defied daylight and expectation, who had built entire kingdoms in secrecy, demonstrated that his defiance had limits, and that even kings must bow to the unrelenting machinery of power. The trap was set, the players in place, and the shadow kingdom that had flourished in darkness was about to be extinguished. As night fell over Lake Starnberg, the final act of Ludwig's life began with a walk that would become legend, though the truth behind it remained shrouded in mystery. The sky, heavy with the remnants of a passing storm, cast a dark and reflective surface across the water. Ludwig and Dr. Bernhard von Gudden left the castle alone, guards dismissed under the pretense that the king was calm and posed no danger. Every step along the muddy path was deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if Ludwig understood the gravity of this moment and embraced it with quiet acceptance. The lake itself, wide and dark, mirrored the turbulence of the world above, a symbol of the isolation and inevitability that had defined the king's final days. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, rain-soaked leaves, and a tension that seemed to stretch time itself. Each ripple on the water's surface echoed the countless secrets Ludwig had carried, the hidden loves, the shadow kingdom he had meticulously constructed, and the photograph that had exposed him to enemies too powerful to resist. In those moments, the king walked with dignity, even as the walls of his private world crumbled behind him. The relationship with Gudden, a man who had condemned him without ever knowing him, added a final layer of irony and tragedy. No words were exchanged that have survived, only the sound of their boots, the soft lapping of water, and the muted whisper of history pressing down. It was a walk both ordinary and extraordinary, the calm before the final, inexplicable act, a journey that would end in death, ambiguity, and the final obliteration of a shadow kingdom built in darkness. By the time search parties reached the lake, the quiet walk had ended in a scene that would spark decades of speculation, mystery, and controversy. Two bodies floated in the shallow, dark water of Lake Starnberg, only 25 meters from the shore, yet the circumstances were anything but simple. One was King Ludwig II, the man who had spent his life reversing time, bending night into day, and building kingdoms of secrecy. The other was Dr. Bernhard von Gudden, The very man who had declared the king insane without examination, now lying beside him, his face marked with scratches and his neck bearing clear signs of strangulation. Onlookers and investigators were confounded. The water was waist deep, yet the bodies were discovered floating as if suspended by unseen forces. Ludwig's watch had stopped at 6:54 p.m., Gooden's at 8:10, creating conflicting timelines that deepened the mystery. Even more perplexing, no water was found in Ludwig's lungs, defying the official conclusion of drowning. And then there was the fisherman who first discovered the bodies, Jakob Liedl, whose role would become almost as enigmatic as the deaths themselves. Payments arrived mysteriously, his silence ensured by forces unseen, and within months he rose to a position of prominence in his town. The water, calm yet dark, seemed to hold the secrets of the night, concealing a truth that no official report could adequately explain. Every detail, the depth, the timing, the missing or vanished items, added to the puzzle. Historians, investigators, and curious minds alike have debated what truly happened that evening. The photograph, the conspiracies, and the shadow kingdoms all led to this moment. It was a death scene where clarity was impossible, where silence was enforced, and where the world saw only what it was allowed to see, while the lake quietly absorbed the rest, keeping the king's final secrets hidden beneath its still, reflective surface. The official story of that night, recorded in reports and newspapers, was simple, neat, and entirely misleading. Ludwig II had drowned, and in a tragic act of desperation, Dr. von Guden had died alongside him. Yet every physical detail, every timeline, and every witness account pointed to a reality far more complicated. Ludwig was an excellent swimmer, yet no water was found in his lungs, a glaring contradiction to the claim of drowning. The depth of the lake was shallow, waist-high at most, making accidental drowning implausible. Conflicting times on the watches suggested that the official narrative of a synchronized death was impossible. Other evidence vanished almost immediately after the incident. Ludwig's coat, said to contain 2 bullet holes, disappeared and has never resurfaced. The fisherman who found the bodies, Jakob Liedl, received mysterious payments for decades, rising to become the mayor of his town without ever speaking publicly about that night. Every element of the physical scene, floating bodies, missing items, inconsistent times, pointed to intervention, to planning, to deliberate manipulation. The official verdict served a purpose. It closed the case, appeased the public, and allowed those in power to erase inconvenient truths. It ignored the photograph that had revealed the king's hidden life, the shadow kingdom he had built in darkness, and the political and personal forces that had converged to remove him. The question lingers: who truly benefited from the silence imposed on witnesses, the missing evidence, and the distorted narrative? It was not mere accident or misfortune, it was a calculated erasure. The official story sanitized the scene, but the physical reality whispered another truth. The king had been exposed, hunted, and eliminated. The photograph did not merely reveal love, it became a catalyst, proving that Ludwig's very existence threatened those who could not tolerate freedom. The truth, however, remained submerged, just as the bodies floated silently beneath the dark waters of Lake Starnberg. After the deaths of Ludwig II and Dr. von Guden, the cleanup was swift, meticulous, and thorough, leaving almost no trace of the king's shadow kingdom. Private papers, diaries, and letters that revealed the intricacies of his secret life were seized, most of them burned before they could be studied. The Venus Grotto, the jewel of his nocturnal realm, was sealed for renovations that lasted years, effectively erasing the physical spaces where his passions and freedoms had been expressed. Servants and companions who had participated in the king's nighttime gatherings were quietly dismissed, often compensated with generous pensions, yet bound by strict agreements of confidentiality. Those who had seen the hidden world firsthand were removed, relocated, or persuaded to leave Bavaria entirely, ensuring that no living witness could contradict the sanitized version of events. The castles themselves, once filled with secret corridors, hidden doors, and private chambers, were repurposed, converted into tourist attractions, or left to history under careful supervision. The machinery of power moved deliberately to rewrite history in real time. Letters that could expose intimacy became evidence of madness. Private gatherings were labelled eccentricity, and monumental achievements were stripped of their context. The Shadow Kingdom, which had allowed a king to live authentically in darkness, vanished from public memory, leaving only faint whispers, rumours, and the occasional photograph. History was edited with precision, narratives controlled, and memory shaped to serve those in authority. In the end, the king's life, love, and brilliance were reduced to fragments, viewed only through a lens filtered by the interests of power. The cleanup was complete, not just a physical erasure, but a moral and historical one, ensuring that the true story of the man who dared to live freely in darkness would remain hidden beneath layers of secrecy and carefully maintained silence. The final irony of Ludwig II's life lies in the very legacy that those who orchestrated his downfall inadvertently created. The same castles, grottoes, and fairy tale palaces that were built to hide his secrets and protect his freedom became monuments of public fascination and immense profit. Nushwanstein, Linderhof, and Herrenchiemsee, once private kingdoms of desire and secrecy, were open to tourists, generating millions of euros annually. Visitors, cameras, and guidebooks admire the beauty, the grandeur, and the fantastical architecture, but almost none see the true purpose behind each hidden corridor, secret passage, or carefully concealed chamber. The world profits from the dreams of a man who was hunted for living those dreams openly. His private life, once considered dangerous and scandalous, is now sanitized into legend, a fairy tale version that celebrates creativity while erasing the truth. The very institutions and governments that declared him insane and orchestrated his removal now monetize his imagination, selling tickets to walk through the stone manifestations of his hidden freedom. Every photograph, every postcard, every souvenir from these castles is a reminder of the cruel paradox. A man destroyed for living authentically is now immortalized for the beauty he created in his brief hours of truth. The irony cuts even deeper when one considers that the secret he lived for, love, freedom, and self-expression, was never truly accessible to the public, yet the structures built to safeguard it are visited by millions every year. Those who tried to erase him ended up making him visible, turning the Shadow Kingdom into a global spectacle. Ludwig's life was extinguished, but his imagination and vision remain untouchable, haunting the world as a monument to the price of living beyond the constraints of power and to the resilience of human creativity that even death cannot suppress. The photograph that began this chain of events remains the ultimate symbol of Ludwig II's freedom and the danger it posed to those in power. It was not debts, eccentricities, or even madness that killed him. The king died because he existed outside the limits that society, politics, and monarchy could tolerate. That single forbidden image captured more than a moment. It captured truth, defiance, and love that could not be constrained by rules or convention. It proved that Ludwig had lived authentically in a world designed to suppress him, and for that, the forces around him could not allow him to survive. His life, carefully hidden in darkness for decades, was made visible in an instant, and visibility in the wrong hands became a death sentence. Yet even in death, Ludwig left an indelible mark. His castles, grottoes, and dreams still stand, silent testaments to a man who dared to exist beyond expectation. The Shadow Kingdom he built, the love he cherished, and the life he lived in secret were destroyed. But the physical monuments remain, haunting in their beauty, and reminding the world that freedom can never be fully erased. Today, millions walk through halls he once inhabited, photograph towers he once lit with electric lamps, and admire grottoes he designed for love. Yet they do so unaware of the truth beneath the stone and shadow. The photograph didn't kill the king, it proved he was free. And freedom, the very thing power fears most, cannot be destroyed by proclamations, conspiracies, or even murder. Ludwig II lived and loved in darkness, died under mysterious circumstances, and yet continues to inspire, a reminder that authenticity can challenge authority, and that truth, once captured, endures beyond the confines of time, power, and human control.